Shalom. 2 weeks ago in Parshat Vayeshev, our ancestor Yaakov was running away from home, had this great vision of angels going up and down a ladder, and made this vow that if God will take care of him, that in fact God will be his God. Now, after more than 20 years away, he comes home. The Parsha, Vayeshev, begins, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan, and Yaakov, Jacob, dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. And in that whole first chapter of the Parasha, no mention of God. No mention of God at all. You have to wonder, why is it that he comes home after all this time and doesn't reaffirm that vow that he made so many years before? And yet, just a few chapters later, when we're in the midst of the story of Yaakov's son Yosef and all the problems that Yosef has after he is sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, God is not only mentioned several times, but we're taught Vayihi Adonai et Yosef Vayish Matzliach, that God is with Joseph, and Joseph is a successful, prosperous person. We're told that when Yosef arrives at the home of Potiphar, the man will eventually have him thrown in jail because he suspects that Yosef has tried to seduce his wife after she falsely accuses him of trying to seduce her. And then when he's actually in the prison and people come to him, people start to take counsel with him. We're told that Yosef is successful. It's hard to imagine someone being in prison and being successful, but not when you're told that God is with you. That makes sense. That reminded me of the story that Natan Sharansky tells us about his years in prison in the Soviet Gulag. How he was inspired, how he maintained his moral integrity, how he maintained his spiritual integrity by keeping a copy of Tehillim, the Psalms, with him at all times. How he constantly turned to the Psalms in order to find spiritual strength. How God was with him throughout his 9 years of imprisonment in the Soviet Gulag. He never let go. God was always with him. He found the strength to survive those 9 difficult years in prison. The rabbis, however, find that perhaps this is miyutar, unnecessary. After all, isn't God always with us? This is a point made by Rabbi Bradley Shavid Artson, who's going to be visiting with us here at the Anshe Emet synagogue for a Shabbat in mid-December. And he brings a couple of commentaries, one of which teaches that, in the name of Rav Huna, that what Yosef did was make himself aware of God's presence by constantly mouthing the words and reciting God's name and constantly having God, an awareness of God. Not just knowing, not just having some kind of abstract knowledge, but making something concrete that impacted on the way he behaved. In other words, Yosef wasn't just blessed by having God protecting him, but Yosef behaved in a way that reflected God's active involvement in his life, and therefore felt his protection, and Yosef walked the talk. So while there are many people in the world who talk about God and pay lip service to God, one of the lessons that we can draw from Yosef's life and Yosef's predicament and how Yosef behaves is the need for us not just to pay lip service to God, but to be able to walk the talk. Perhaps if Yaakov, when he came home after all those years, had reaffirmed his vow, the vow he had made at the beginning of Parshat Vayeshev, and said that, yes, in fact, God has been with me all this time. Perhaps if Yaakov had walked the talk a little bit, we would have felt a greater awareness of God in Yaakov's life, and the text might have said that Yaakov too was matzliach, successful, prosperous, as it does about Yosef, even at the time when he's sitting in jail, in a prison. Some food for thought for this Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.